Oh, I'm standing in a blue light. I've been told to just start, so that's what I'll do. Diesen Stuhl weg. Hello, I'm Vera. That was loud. I'm part of Field. We're a creative studio based in London, now also in Berlin. And we work between art, design, and technology, kind of always at the intersection. We're more a design studio than an agency or a production company. We actually make everything ourselves. We work as visual artists, as directors across motion, experiential, a lot of spatial work, often with brands directly or with agencies in collaboration. Oh, this is the wrong way around. I run the studio together with Marcus. That's Marcus. It's been 9 years now. He, for some reason, hasn't changed at all. He's our creative director. I'm more on the management side, basically doing everything else, work with our clients, get projects off the ground, and we do a lot of concept work together. We met in Kassel in art school where we studied, the course there for visual communication is what Marcus often calls a loophole in the German education system. It's a very liberal environment, if you like, and there's essentially not really any rules. You do one exam to get in, you do one exam to get out, and in between you just have to stay for 5 years and figure out something that makes you get up in the morning. We started with a very specific focus on generative design and interactive arts, and we wanted to use code and technology to make visuals and visual communication come alive and dynamic and responsive. We built camera interactives with analog cameras and infrared lamps from China that got very, very hot. We built, in that situation, Marcus built computer vision systems from scratch. This is, I think, me in the hotel room trying to get some emails done and kind of having to act as a test person in between, kind of trying to do a blob detection to interact with your hands. We made a short film with generative landscapes, which was a grueling 13 minutes long. At that time, we thought that was short. Now I know better. And we made it by building an animation tool in Java with a particle simulation, lots of parametric controls that would move ice flows around from a top-down view, and then we used that as height maps and animated these landscapes in Maya. I'll tell you why I'm doing all this kind of very old stuff in a minute. So our journey into motion design was actually a slightly different one. We've got some chairs in the front, guys, if you want to come ahead. So we kind of approached it almost from the other side, coming from real time. And it was a very different kind of take. It was more like setting up a Petri dish with a simulation, and then filming that situation, render everything, and then take the best bits and edit them together. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to take that out. There we go. I apologize for the quality. This was made in PAL. So many kind of established principles in CG and motion design and animation, like simulating only what you have in the viewport, or those kind of principles were really obscure to us. But still, we made linear rendered pieces, and we ended up building lists of keyframes for our simulations and kind of as text only, and then read them into the simulation so that you could have something like a keyframe animation. And more often, we found ourselves saying like, oh, it'd actually be kind of nice to have a timeline now. And by now, we have accepted that we need to make storyboards, that we need to make animatics, but this kind of real-time approach is still really what shapes how we make ideas and how we develop concepts today. And what we've learned in the process is that if you can build your own tools, then you can connect different pipelines and you can create something that essentially is not possible in any other way. And you can take an idea across different media and you can build the missing parts in between. Today we work a lot in Houdini, Rabbit Hole. Most often, kind of our standard pipeline is from Houdini to Cinema, rendering with Octane. But we often, like I said, build the custom bits in between that make it possible, for example, to have a real-time interactive that generates the geometry, which is then rendered, at a higher quality in a CG pipeline, or the other way around. We generate really, really complex geometry or point clouds, which then get rendered and shaded in real time in a web experience, for example. And when we have a project that is, let's say, mainly real-time, then we can take the mechanics to, and take the simulation and create also the, assets for print, for video, and cater for a full spectrum of a campaign, basically. So much about the past. Right after we graduated, we moved to London, started the studio there. We're both German, so it's a bit funny to kind of speak English in Germany. And the fact that we were very green at that time and never had a proper job, never learned how things are actually done, was another factor that allowed us to really shape our own approach and not really do things in a way that we were taught, but do only things that in the way they made sense to us, which obviously meant that we had to learn a lot of things the hard way, but it has its advantages as well. We've got a super nice team over there. One of them is here. Always around like 10, 15 people, art directors, people who come from motion design, graphic design, coders, computational designers, producers, very important. This is not at the studio, this is our favorite Turkish up the road. This is what it looks like on the inside. On Fridays, we cook for lunch. For some reason, it's always about food. Or ping pong, or both. Don't tell Philip, please. And now we're also in Berlin. That is, for now, me. I'm in Berlin. But we're slowly building up a team over there. If you're interested in working with us, please talk to me later. Temporary headquarters in this cafe in Friedrichshain. The lady answers the phone for me sometimes. And now I'll finally show you some of our work. Thank you. Can you take it down for me? The volume, thanks. So at the heart, we're essentially image makers. We make brand visuals, illustrations, everything we do, we always try to have a very strong, fresh aesthetic. We don't do anything that doesn't have it, like interactives that don't have a visual component, essentially. Please cut this slide out of the video documentation. It can get me into trouble. And the other area that we work in is experiential, immersive and interactive works, often for retail, for campaigns, for events. And we also collaborate with architects quite often on to create permanent art installations. In a lot of our projects, we're actually trying to visualize something that is invisible by nature. We work a lot with data inputs, and in this project, it was slightly different. We wanted to emphasize the movement and the power and the elegance that is in it, and actually borrow from the visual language that is used in performance tracking in professional sports. Or we're trying to express a very specific feeling in a visual way. For example, how it feels when you go out for a run and you get into a real flow and you realize that you're actually a lot stronger than you thought you were going to be when you're getting up in the morning. This is a small series of art films that we made for Diesel and it's shown at the flagship stores. We've made a few series like that, where we're playing with how basically our digital habits change how we look at landscape and nature. And sometimes we even get a very, very beautiful task to try and capture what the vision of a place is and to express that in a visual artwork. This is our biggest permanent screen installation so far. Hopefully there will be others. It's in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. The building is, we've actually completed it like 3 years ago. It's been in storage for a very long time because the building is not getting ready. It's a research center about renewable energies, but it's in Saudi, so it's obviously actually about oil. Super nice building by Zaha Hadid. I think it's actually maybe the last one that she designed herself. This is the interior, so a very amazing space to work in, really. And as it so often happens, the architects have planned for a huge screen in the atrium outside the library with no plan whatsoever what is ever going to run on it. Then they bring in museum designers who kind of around the corner here, they have an exhibition with like interactive tables where you can learn about the work that they do there. So those guys said, the client said, you guys come up with something that is on this wall. And they said, don't really know where to start. And they got us involved. So when we came in, it was a lot of stakeholders, like so often. They wanted to have lots of information on this wall and the king's portrait every 5 minutes, as if there weren't enough portraits of the king everywhere already. And it all kind of didn't make sense. It was like they wanted everything and nothing. So we started this process with weeks and weeks of conversations and thinking and just cleaning up the expectations that they had and kind of trying to cover everything that they wanted. And the first thing that we did was incredibly simple. And they have 2 walls, actually. You see it a little bit. There's a smaller one around the corner here. So we said, everything that is information goes onto the small wall. And the big one is left alone. It's purely an artwork, and we're calling that the vision wall because we want to try and find metaphors and images in motion that kind of speak for or represent something that all the scientists that come and go in this place, from all sorts of disciplines, different countries, different languages, something that they have in common. And we came up with 3 images, not images, artworks or metaphors. The first one is for, is a network visualization for, the spark that you need to, start an idea and start your research. We took brain scan data from an open source project, the Human Connectome project, and just, it captures the signal flow in the human brain, and we use that as a canvas, essentially. The other one is an infinite cave journey. Every time it plays, you get into a different cave, and just, as a very, very simple idea and narrative of continuously going deeper, not giving up. You can't see what you're looking for. It might be around the corner. It might be months away from your work, and that felt like something that, no matter what kind of scientific work you do, that is a problem that you will come across. And the last one, finally, is what we're calling the solar sailor. It's basically an infinite sequence of sunrises and sunsets as you would see it when you're on the International Space Station and you're orbiting around the Earth. And we really like that picture because if I imagine working there, I would probably get hung up in politics and funding applications, and we wanted to put something there on this really, really massive screen that would maybe help remind people of the relevance of the work that they're doing there every day. They're doing nothing less than trying to find energy provision for the future generations on this planet. So I think that's worth celebrating with something big and beautiful. And I didn't mention yet, it all runs in real time. It's 80 screens. See it here. 80 screens, 20 signals, so 4 screens get 1 HD signal. This was spec'd 5 years ago, so terribly outdated, but it works. And it's driven by a cluster of 10 PCs, which is then duplicated as a backup cluster, 2 GPUs each, and we really, really built some very scary low-level framework shit for this. It's the framework software that drives the artwork synchronizes these 10 machines and the 20 GPUs 60 times per second, even keeps the line refresh of every screen in sync, because you would see it on that scale, just every tiny little detail just completely blows up in your face. We do not only work on commissions, but we do a lot of self-initiated works as well. Some people call it artworks. I prefer to leave that to the viewer. The thing that it's about for us is to set our own topics, to kind of really dive into things that we want to engage with, and also to not wait for someone to commission you to do the same thing again that you did last year, but to actively shape what kind of projects you work on. And it's also about having authorship and a certain integrity in your work. And I think for us as designers, it's also about realizing that even when we make advertising, we create culture, and we kind of have to take responsibility for the pictures that we're putting out there. I think for us as commercial artists, that's even more relevant. If you were a fine artist and you're independent, then you obviously take that responsibility automatically. But for me, it's not only about working for good corporations, not working for the bad guys. Are there any good corporations out there anymore? I don't know. But it's for me more about taking your audience serious, and not when you're taking people's time up, then we don't want to fool them or shout at them or make them feel bad about themselves. But instead, we could at least show them something that is beautiful, that maybe they want to spend some time with, maybe even something that triggers a feeling or a thought, or maybe even a little bit more than that. We did not pay these people, I swear. They just showed up. 180 degrees turn back to corporations. Yes, I think these things do go together. Because out of this attitude of being quite critical of our own role as designers as well, it just happened that more and more often we also get involved as consultants. We work with brands on, how they represent themselves in the near future, or working on strategic questions. And we didn't wake up one morning and said, "Oh, we're becoming consultants now because there's money in that." It was a lot more out of the conversations that we were in already. We're doing that not only with like cool lifestyle brands, but even with like B2B corporations and engineering and such. And in that role, we're like a critical outside partner, do a lot of design research, and for example, about how a brand identity could or would have to change if all of a sudden everything is digital. So essentially, we're thinking about what the future might look like in images, or what it might feel like. Because when our lives, like our really everyday use cases, everyday lives are changing through technology, then that will have an effect on how we communicate and how, on our identity, really. When we're more and more becoming one with digital services, especially like autonomous artificial intelligence systems, what happens when these things don't work like they're supposed to do? Already now, these systems are having a lot of control over our lives. They filter what news we get to see. They decide whether we get a mortgage or not. And they recommend products that we are supposed to like, and then very often actually end up liking. And I don't know what effect, but I think this must somehow affect how we feel as human beings. It's a strong inference. And these questions, very roughly described, is what our latest short film, experimental short, is about. We've been working on it since last summer, and at times it's been a really, really challenging project to work on. To bring these like very abstract and slightly strange ideas somehow together into something that has an arc or not. And I haven't shown it very often yet, so please tell me later what you think of it. But I think this whole, thank you. This whole kind of subject area for us is it's not actually just about poetry and emotions and all of that. It's also a very, very tangible social problem. As a society, we actually don't have any images, we don't have any metaphors that help us discuss these things that are so fundamentally changing our world right now, and also faster than any other thing in technology ever has. What does it look like when there's something in the news about artificial intelligence, robotics, cybercrime, that kind of stuff? Not a lot of visual progress made since The Matrix. And I think for us, kind of collectively, like all of us, as visual artists, that is something that we need to take on board. I hope you agree. We started realizing this when we were working together with a few big brands in technology and automotive, and we saw that there is really a huge gap in our visual repertoire. So we started a series called System Aesthetics, kind of part of the same series of like the film Hidden Layer as well. And the idea is to make machine learning algorithms, neural networks, visible. We really tried to sit down and look at what kind of technical information we could find about these systems, about their software architecture, about how they work on the inside. And most of that information is, of course, proprietary. It's protected by corporations, and that is actually where the problem starts. The kind of visualization that probably many of you know is these kind of schematics for neural network. You have something coming in on the left and you have an output on the right, and in between is obviously a lot happening, but it all looks the same. I don't think that pictures like this will help us get excited about the future. So it probably needs a bit more insight into the complexity. We then joined up with Wired magazine for this series and tried to visualize the 5 algorithms that will have a big impact in 2018 and make them tangible. For each one, we kind of studied the technical structure, the software architecture, wherever we actually could find something, like an open source library or scientific papers, things like that. This picture is about kind of next generation voice assistants. We used an open source library from Google called SyntaxNet for this. Basically, it's natural language processing. And those systems are now, that's the kind of new thing for this year, which you already have in your pockets. They're not only able to answer questions, but they're able to calculate the intent of your question by taking lots of other data from other apps on your phone into account. So definitely something that we should talk about and see if we actually want it in our lives, I would say. So you can see an input coming in here as a waveform, sound input, feeding into a convoluted network, being compared to thousands of reference samples, and then with each stage kind of narrowing down to a conclusion. So you could obviously say that this doesn't tell me anything more than the schematic image that we have, but it does give you a feeling. It feels technical. It has a material. It kind of talks to you, and it looks organized and smart and whatever. And it does illustrate the complexity rather than hiding it at a kind of digestible level. And also we wanted, especially in the motion, to really bring across how dynamic and adaptable these systems are, because that's something that we normally can't see. Some of those algorithms that we picked already have a metaphor in their name. This is an illustration of the blockchain principle, where the entire information is stored simultaneously in every single unit, these distributed ledgers, the slices that we have in the image. And that's why people say that these systems are more democratic, because there's no kind of central authority that stores the information. For this image, we used a data set of 1 full day of transactions in Ethereum. So what the data set is driving is the tiny little data points on the surfaces, not the overall structure. So there was a lot of kind of mix of something data-driven and a lot of just creative interpretation. And another breakthrough that is meant to really change or make AI significantly more powerful is are systems where you basically have 2 algorithms pitched against each other. One generator, one validator, and they do learn from each other's behavior. They kind of adapt and kind of evolve continuously, autonomously, unsupervised, as we call it, and that's something that right now is used in experiments to scale up a small picture of a cat into a bigger picture of a cat, making up the gaps. But the potential that I think scientists see in this is that AI systems can become independent from training data, so that they can work with any kind of input, because you have these 2 forces at play. And that's obviously something that singularity is something that I'm not entirely sure about yet. So that was an independent project, but obviously these questions also have a really, really big relevance in brand communications, and obviously that's where our commercial interest comes back in. For example, if you imagine every single car manufacturer has an autonomous vehicle in their product palette, how can they help their customers even decide which one to buy? Bringing across a feeling of driving one car or the other is already something that is very difficult to bring across when the person is still driving themselves. If you don't even have that, you feel the responsiveness, then what kind of imagery are we going to use to bring this across, to advertise these products quite literally? And again, it is essentially again about building trusts. How should I decide as a normal human being whether I want to allow this car to drive my kids to school if I literally don't have a picture of how it works? And I think this, it sounds a bit simple to say you need to create an image in order to kind of decide whether you want to trust it or not. But I think it actually really works. So these pictures are sketches how autonomous driving could look like in brand communication. If you look a little bit into it, on which kind of technical level autonomous driving is right now, it's mainly about environment perception. It's about different sensors, 5, 6, 7 different systems that all calculate their information into one environment model. From normal cameras, radar, GPS, distance sensing, and all of that. And the metaphor that we just picked for this as just one example is a system of lenses, like in a zoom camera lens. And all of these informations are running together in a neural network, where they're again cross-referenced with training data, etc. And then at some point you can say this is a tree and this is a bike. That's pretty much how far it is. It's not yet. All the information being stored in the cloud is all not safe enough yet. It's really about what is around me. So if we're trying to imagine how this could really be applied in a TVC, for example, then we want to start with the one thing that the human perception and the, let's say, AI perception have in common, and that is the image of the real world. And then going deeper and deeper kind of into that neural network, for which we've used our favorite visual language, glass boxes, and never really losing that anchor to the live action image of the real world. And then in other situations, you might have interfaces where we're actually interacting with an AI system, and in that situation, we need something that is a lot more iconographic, something that is smaller, but we still feel like a lot of the AIs that you interact with, they have very, very strongly simplified icons. If you think about Google's visual language, for example, or IBM Watson. And we feel like that's not going to be enough very soon, because we will all understand these things more, and we will have a certain demand to get an insight and not deal with Hal from Space Odyssey, who is probably going to fuck us up as a kind of black box. So the difficult thing is to find the right balance between the expectation to be to do justice to the complexity and to be authentic, which also creates transparency, and also I think brings the fascination across, like why are we getting excited about these new possibilities, but also the kind of the idea and the expectation to be accessible, to be friendly, to be iconic. So this is the kind of challenges that we're excited about at the moment and working on a lot on like a lot of different layers in commissions and brand projects and in our own artworks. I think there is a lot of work left to do as kind of for us as a community, and I think that's the idea that I would like to leave you with today. Thank you. Quick thing, I'm doing the same thing, probably a bit quicker, again tomorrow at 12 at the Maxon stand. Thanks very much for having me, Maxon. And we're always looking for good people, both in London and in Berlin. If anybody's interested in doing kind of weird stuff like this, please talk to me. Thanks. Oh yeah, do you have any questions? Does anybody have questions? Do we have time for questions? Super. Nobody. Well, I guess I explained everything really well. Ja, bitte. Yes. Good ones. Only. Yes, we do. No particular kind of fixed timelines or anything, just send your stuff. And what we try and do with internships is always, find a project where you can really be a part of the actual team, because we're too small to have an entertainment program for interns. So it's much better to actually be part of a real production. So sometimes we get really good applications, but we can't take somebody on because we don't need somebody who works with electronics right now or something like that. But we're very keen to meet people who do nice stuff. Yes, please. It's the R&D part is larger than I think for most studios. It's often weeks where we, anything visual just stays on a sketch level. And that is also one of the reasons why we do this stuff as self-initiated works, because in commissions, we often have like timelines between 6 and 10 weeks or something. You need to turn something around really quickly, and you can't go into that kind of depth. We still often do it, and then it kind of gets really squishy at the end. But I think it's usually at least a third of the time, if not more than that. it's kind of, it's also, I'm not a programmer. You probably noticed that in the first part of my talk, but it's something that I really learned to understand from, when you work with code. It doesn't really matter when you throw something away 3 days before the deadline, because then you will actually know how you want to build it, and you're going to get to the end result much faster. It's sometimes, especially with CG and render times and everything, it's very difficult to deal with and to make that decision quite late in the process. But generally, once we know what we want, you can actually make it a lot faster. And you can't really, if you dabble around, then you might get stuck in your own process. Anything else? Cool. Thanks very much.